gun legislation will have enough votes to pass Congress. On one side, you have some progressive Democrats who say it doesn't go far enough or question some of the initiatives. And then you have some conservatives who say this will do nothing to prevent any mass shootings. This all happening as we reach record high gas prices and an economy that appears to be getting into recession territory. Well, joining us right now to discuss, Florida Congressman Byron Donalds. Good morning to you, sir.
Morning.
Let's start with the issue most Americans are concerned about right now, the economy, of course, record inflation, record gas prices. The Fed meeting today expected to raise interest rates by 0.75 of a percentage point, the largest increase since 1994. How can this economic ship be turned around? Has it already hit the iceberg?
Unfortunately, yes, it has hit the iceberg. And I think what the Fed is trying to do right now is move as quickly, for the Fed anyway, move pretty quickly to try to right the ship. But it's going to be tough. I got to tell you, inflation is already obviously pervasive through the economy. It's not going anywhere. The Fed is going to have to get serious about interest rate moves, which is going to slow down our economy without a doubt. We're starting to see some of the initial work on that right now. When you have high gas prices, consumers just can't spend as they used to spend because as opposed to them going out and doing the things they want to do, they're filling up their cars. Food prices are up. They're having to actually eat. These are things that slow down the broader economy. Interest rate hikes are going to do the same.
Congressman, you recently wrote an op-ed recounting your childhood in Brooklyn, New York, and you say that you lived in fear of guns, but emotions can't dictate policies. First, can you just share a little bit about your background and how you grew up with a single mom and why your life turned out so much differently than some other young men and women who grew up with similar circumstances?
Well, I mean, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. You know, we were poor. My single mom, we were poor. But my mother stressed education. I mean, she was tough. I mean, she honestly, man, let me tell you, that's one of the toughest ladies I've ever met. And she pulled no punches. There were no excuses. So she demanded excellence out of me all the time. But when I was 16, I was coming home from basketball practice. I was held up at gunpoint. And so, you know, at 16, you don't expect your life to be over, but that's what happens. In spite of even that happened to me, you know, being a legislator, you can't just think emotionally all the time. You have to take a step back, look at the actual data, look at the actual facts, and then base policy on that. Every time Washington does something based on emotion so that something never happens again, what we end up finding out in the future is that they actually got the policy wrong. That impacts far more people than just the tragedy itself. So with respect to Uvalde and Buffalo, as tragic as those shootings are, not just for those cities, but for the country, we can't just rely on emotion to write policy. We have to take a step back, really think the policy through and make sure it's the right thing for the United States of America.
I want to read a little bit of your op-ed right here because you went on to say that my job as an elected official is to determine what that something should and should not be and make the difficult decision to decipher what is best for my constituents and the future of our nation. Today, all eyes are on our Congress to determine that something, and we must make sure raw emotion does not cloud our judgment, but rather that steady constitutional solutions take priority. Congressman, what's your suggestion at this point? What is that something that perhaps Congress needs to do?
Well, I think there are two key things that I think are in this Senate negotiation that I think actually really do matter. One is a focus on mental health. The other is a focus on school hardening. I think that for a lot of schools in the country, they're not hardened the way Florida schools have actually been moving towards hardening after the Parkland shooting that occurred a few years ago. Those two things I think will actually help prevent not just the Uvalde issue or make them less likely, but also the situation in Buffalo. The Buffalo shooter, if you actually went through the manifesto, it was clear, had many psychological issues. And there were red flags there that did exist. But even under New York's red flag laws, nobody used the system to actually prevent that person from acquiring a weapon. And so this is the issue you have. You have to deal with these mental health issues, especially when people are young, and actually try to find a way to get that stuff resolved before they get older. And then tragedy could happen. I don't want to say can happen, they could happen, because even with people who are having some mental health issues, their likelihood of violence is actually low. Their likelihood of mass shootings is incredibly low. So you have to be very careful about how you're going to apply law and funding. And it can't just be we're taking away guns, because the vast majority of law-abiding citizens don't cause harm to people. They simply don't. And when I say vast majority, I'm talking like 99.5% of gun owners in America.
And Congressman, when you look at the makeup of Congress right now and you look at the House and with what you're hearing sort of behind the scenes, does the current proposal have enough votes with progressive Democrats as well as conservatives?
Well, look, based upon the Senate proposal as it exists, I'm not sure the House Democrats would vote for it, because House Democrats are very clear. They want to be incredibly aggressive. They're not particularly concerned with the Second Amendment. They want to just go with gun control measures that Republicans simply are not going to support. So it remains to be seen if House Democrats can actually get a coalition of votes together to be supportive of what the Senate is doing. I think the other thing I would tell you from a Republican perspective, from a conservative perspective, there are concerns about red flag laws. Because what people need to understand that if there is a judicial proceeding that takes place where you, the person who the purpose of the proceeding is about, is not present to defend yourself, in my view, that's a violation of the Fifth Amendment. You're allowed to actually stand before your accusers in the United States. You're allowed to have a defense. Under the way some red flag laws operate, you have no ability to stand for yourself and to actually stand against your accusers, and your property is taken from you. And then you have to go get it adjudicated. That's a Fifth Amendment violation in my view. I think that's some of the issues with red flag laws.
All right. Byron Donalds, great seeing you this morning. As always, we appreciate you joining us here.
Anytime.